Hello darlings, welcome back to my channel. Firstly, I did want to thank anyone that viewed and or commented on my previous Young Rippa video. I was not expecting it to blow up the way it did, but I do thank you for your support. Secondly, I did want to talk about that my content is currently all over the place. I'm happy to continue to do periodic updates on the campaign while I wait for my book. As I write this, Eric has passed the 3.2 million milestone, so congratulations to him and to his team for getting out there and making that bread. I have a feeling that with how long the campaign is going on, it will easily reach up to the 8 to 10 million range if that enthusiasm keeps up, so that's good on him. One thing that I did want to touch on is try and understand how a $200,000 investment spiraled into one of the most successful pre-order campaign launches for any indie publisher. Now, understanding Eric's success means that I must acknowledge the social climate of what has been going on, not only in the comic book industry, but in the entertainment section as a whole. I'll be breaking it down from a normie's perspective. If you want more information, I will leave you some other YouTubers to check out that will explain more of the situation in depth. I encourage everyone to verify my proof and do your own research to check if what I am saying has merit. What I have to concede is that a lot of the issue boils down to the idea of inclusivity and diversity, or wokeness, though I don't like using the latter term. Now, as an aside, based on the U.S. Census Bureau, Hispanics make up 18% of the population, Black people make up roughly 13% of the population, Asians make up 6% of the population. As far as gender identity goes, roughly 3% identify as gay or lesbian, 4% are bisexual, and 2% are something else, and another 2% are as they don't know. And yes, I do understand that the census may have problems such as not including the homeless or leaving aliens out of the numbers, but in general, this is a good measure of how the makeup of the US is broken down. So when you virtue signal or pander to the Black folks or the queer, understand that the population that you are targeting is extremely small. That is just an absolute fact. So knowing this, let's move on to the concepts of inclusivity, diversity, and equality. How I define inclusivity is the acknowledgement that people of color, gender expression, disability are not left out of a community. Diversity, on the other hand, is having people from different walks of life, regardless of color, gender expression, disability, that are included within a community. These are very basic, bare bones definition, but I need to stress that this is my personal interpretation. If you want to argue with me if I'm missing the correct terminology, then that's your business. I don't have any desire to nitpick a definition, although I'm sure somebody will probably still do it in the comments section anyway. Now, I think what trips many people up is inclusivity does not mean the same thing as equality. Equality is meaning that regardless of nationality, sex, gender, creed, origin, religion, disability, etc., a person will be given the same opportunities without bias or discrimination, especially as seen in civil rights concern. I realize that these two terms are used interchangeably, and I think that's very disingenuous. The difference between the two definitions is that inclusivity almost forces you to acknowledge or accept a person of color, their sexuality, gender expression, or disability, and is based no matter the circumstances. Failure to do this acknowledgement leads to another issue which I will address shortly. Equality, on the other hand, means that the above-mentioned points will not be held against you because you are in a space. If that is confusing, let me use this example. The fact that I am Black and queer should not be held against me when I apply for a particular job. That detail is wholly irrelevant for an employer, as the important thing is if I can do the set of tasks given to me by a company and if I'm qualified to do it as determined by their job description. This is equality. Inclusivity, on the other hand, means that because I am black and or queer, I automatically should get the job, or somebody that may be more qualified than I am will not get the job because of this perceived need to fill in quotas, or God forbid, they happen to be a white cis male. One of these definitions does not make sense for a business owner to participate in. The other makes it seem as though an individual is a narcissistic piece of shit. Now, the concept of inclusivity has been floating around for some time. I noticed it in the US, it was more prominent when Obama got elected. There were small echoes of it, as in, oh, if a black man can be president, anyone can do anything. The slogan, yes we can, or so stunning and brave quotes were floating around in everyday conversation. The election surrounding Trump's bid for president turned that conversation up tenfold. That is when you started to see all of these social and political movements pop up, like the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, Summer of Love, and a few other social unrest that occurred within this time frame. This is also the start of when social media sites such as Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, etc. started to see a phenomenon known as cancel culture. Now let me be clear on something. I don't like the idea of cancel culture. I wasn't at all happy when Alex Jones got removed off of YouTube, and I didn't like how Trump was removed off of Twitter. I say that as someone who dislikes both of these men for the damage that they've done. What that signaled when both of these incidents happened was that if enough people complain, you can and you will be removed off a site without impunity, regardless if you break the TOS or not. Your account is at the mercy of site holders, and the definition of free speech started to become unraveled as media corporations dictated what was or what wasn't freedom of expression. These site holders, or even a group of people, started to draw the line in the sand as to what was socially acceptable and what was deemed as hate speech. The problem with this is that the people have different interpretations as to what is socially acceptable, and that goalpost moves depending on the infraction, circumstances, and most importantly, the person that committed the infraction. All it takes is a select few people to misrepresent facts or have a bad take, and your entire life gets taken away from you. If the goalpost moves constantly, how can you objectively have a conversation, let alone find common ground with another individual? See what happened to Gina Carano and Johnny Depp to see how this plays out. Now don't get me wrong, if someone is accused of being a child molester or a wife beater, yes, they need to be called out for that shit. But what a lot of Twitter users do is use these terms like pedophile, Nazi, white supremacist, sexist, and X-phobic to mean that a person is factually those things for merely disagreeing with them. Or the worst thing is blatantly lying to make an argument seem true when it isn't. You can actually see this happen in Eric's campaign launch with the detractors, and again, a lot of these people seem to come from the left. So why did I bring all of this up? This demand for inclusivity, coupled with how social media has become a toxic sludge pile, led to corporations hiring people that were not qualified, not capable, or not competent of doing their jobs in their given industry. I believe this is where the term comic book pros surface, as these people were put into positions of power within major companies. Thus, these inclusive people took established characters from Marvel and DC and either destroyed their personalities from what they were or made them into something they were not, i.e., a person of color, queer, or gender-bent characters, leading them to be characters in name only rather than the old characters that many grew up with. This led to the debate of tokenization versus representation in comics. Whether you are alright with tokenization is a topic for another day. However, between the surge of tokenized characters, there were also a drop of quality in the writing from these comic book pros. If you want to see a timeline, you can view Eric's old content, your boy Zach, Yellow Flash, Just Some Guy, Comics by Perch, Geeks and Gamers, etc. for more information, as they know more about the comic book space than I ever could. Now, there was criticism as to what the comic book pros were doing to these established characters and the stories that were being put out. Whether it was pointing out the continuity errors or pointing out how out of character a protagonist was, comic book pros laughed at the backlash and insulted the customers paying for the product, and infamously told these customers, if you don't like my politics, don't buy my comics. And this was one of the reasons why Eric highlighted the fact that your creed, origin, politics, or sexuality doesn't matter in his introduction of the comic video. That bearded bastard will still have you as a customer regardless as to, who you are and your politics. Now, I want you to remember the population statistics that I brought up earlier of how heterosexuality and white people dominate the US. This is important because comic book pros demonize these people, the majority. In either case, the systematic destruction of these comic book characters caused many old school comic book fans to turn their back on the fandom they once loved, to stop buying and collecting comics, and worse yet, move to other avenues of the entertainment industry, i.e. the Japanese market that dominates with manga and anime. These comic book pros then used the inclusivity shield to silence dissent within their ranks, cancel their detractors, kick out those that weren't of the like mind, and most of the time cisgendered white males in the industry, hell, even characters, became under attack from the same people that championed equality and representation. So these diverse people were willing to alienate white males because of perceived slights. In any case, these detractors decided to fight back by creating their own space devoid of comic book pros, and this is where the idea of Comicsgate entered into the mix. Now, I'm still a little bit shaky about this movement, so if I'm wrong, by all means correct me in the comments section, but Comicsgate appears to be a group of people opposed to the idea of inclusivity in comics, promoting quality story writing and seeking to start indie projects to combat the growing trend of inclusivity as seen in the mainstream media. Now, I firmly am under the opinion that gatekeeping was actually done by the comic book pros first when they started kicking out white males, although it seems that term got pushed on Comicsgate to make them seem like the ones with the issue, which is interesting in the grand scheme of things. There is also the issue of gaslighting that comic book pros use to trick their critics into believing that they had misogynistic, racist, or phobic ways of thinking. In either case, if you want to know what types of comics are being put out by the comic book pros, I encourage you to search for them to get an idea of what type of writing and storytelling these people are doing. Nubia, the Real One, and I Am Not Starfire are a good place to start, as dunking on these two comics seem to be almost a pastime. On the other hand, indie comic books like Cayman America, Cyberfrog, and now Rippaverse have been pulling in money despite not having the backing of corporations or having the backing of multi-million-dollar entities. What this seems to suggest is a reduction of quality products available on the open market from those within the sphere of the comic book pros. I've never heard of a comic by a notable comic book pro pulling in numbers like Rippaverse is doing currently, and that's just an observation listening to those that review comics in my sphere. The viewership to these comic book pros simply disappeared, and if it gets spoken about, it's usually making fun of how poor quality the book is. What I will say is that Eric's success seems to hint that many of the comic book fans want a story with substance that can entertain them without the preachy on-the-nose messages that won't insult them for their politics or views. This is the way that comics used to be. And keep in mind, this reduction of quality for the sake of inclusivity isn't just isolated to comic books, but all forms of media and entertainment. Look at how Lord of the Rings of Power, is being ratioed. Buzz Lightyear, despite being tied to one of Disney's more popular franchises, barely can make bank at the box office. And despite the popularity of Star Wars, a toy lightsaber based off of a person of color couldn't get $5,000 to back its production. I know that many will say that Eric is lucky for achieving the success that he has, and there may be truth to that with how he has handled the business aspect of his company. But watching what has been going on from the entertainment sector, he saw a gaping wound that the comic book pros left and said, well, if you aren't going to ignore this sector, let me fill this hole myself. And apparently it was a $3 million investment. It's crazy, but the market has spoken, and it seems to know what it wants and what it will reject. Asher out.